The wind kicked up a veil of dust across the parade ground, turning the morning sun into a soft haze that clung to uniforms and eyelashes alike. Men barked orders, boots struck the earth in rhythm, and rifles snapped in practice drills under the sharp eye of Colonel Emmett Hardwick. He stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, lips thin with disapproval as he surveyed the cadets. Nothing escaped the man. Not loose buttons, not sloppy form, and certainly not the tiny figure mimicking his soldiers behind a fence. She stood on a wooden crate, no taller than a saddle horn, with a cornstalk broom slung across her shoulder like a musket. Her elbows jutted at the wrong angles, her feet weren't spaced right, and her stance, well, it was comically off balance. But her eyes burned with the kind of focus grown men lacked. Colonel Hardwick narrowed his eyes. "Lieutenant," he barked. "Yes, sir. What's that girl doing on my field?" The lieutenant followed the colonel's gaze and chuckled under his breath. "That's Clara Rayburn, sir. Lives up the hill with her aunt. Comes down sometimes. Just likes to watch. Or play soldier," the colonel muttered. "Like it's a game." He strode across the field toward the fence, dust trailing his boots. As he drew closer, the girl snapped to attention, not out of fear but pride. Her broom rested against her shoulder like a rifle. "You plan to shoot crows with that stick?" the colonel said, stopping a few paces from her. Clara looked up, face smudged with dust and sun, freckles like stars across her nose. "I was just practicing," she said, steady. "Practicing what?" he snorted. "How to get laughed off the field. I wasn't hurting anyone." "No, but you're insulting the uniform. That stance would get you tossed on your tail in the real world. That's not how a soldier stands. That's how a little girl plays dress-up." The words cut deeper than he intended. But Clara didn't flinch. "My pa didn't stand like that," she said. "He was a sharpshooter in the 21st. They said he was the best in the territory." Hardwick's face shifted barely. "What was his name?" "Micah Rayburn." That name brought a pause. A long one. The colonel cleared his throat. "He was a fine shot. A good man. He taught me how to breathe before you aim. Said the bullet listens to your lungs more than your finger." The colonel looked down at her grip again, more curious now than mocking. Still, the corners of his mouth curled. "And he taught you that posture, too?" "No, sir," Clara admitted. "I ain't never fired a real gun." "Then don't speak like you have," he said, the softness gone. "Soldiers earn their stance. With sweat. With hours. With silence. And you," he gestured at the broom, "you're wasting everyone's time." Clara's voice dropped low, quiet enough only for the colonel to hear. "I bet I could still hit more targets than any of your men." He blinked. "What did you say?" "I said," she repeated, firmer this time, "I bet I could hit more targets than any of your men." Silence fell around them. The lieutenant snorted. Another soldier nearby muttered, "That girl's cracked." The colonel's eyes narrowed, more amused than angry now. "Tell you what," he said, voice rough like gravel. "Next exhibition day's in 3 weeks. You want to embarrass yourself in front of half the county, come back. Sign up, if you're serious." "I am," Clara said, chin lifted like a flag. "I hope so," he replied, "because once you step into the ring, there ain't no room for pretend." He turned and walked off, the matter dismissed. The girl filed away like a footnote in his day. But Clara didn't move. She stayed standing on the crate, staring after him like she was memorizing the moment. Later that afternoon, Clara sat on the back fence behind the stable, her arms wrapped around Buckshot's neck. The horse nuzzled her cheek, his dark mane rustling gently in the breeze. He was older now, with a white scar above his eye, but he was the last living piece of her father left. "He laughed at me, Buck," she whispered. "All of 'em did." The horse snorted softly, as if disagreeing. Clara leaned into him, eyes hot with something too old for her age. "But he said come back. He said prove it." She pulled a crumpled photo from her pocket, her father in uniform, a half-smile on his lips, holding her as a baby. A scribbled note on the back read, "Aim steady, even when they doubt you." She wiped her cheek with her sleeve and looked toward the distant canyon. "I'm gonna need help," she said, "and not the kind my aunt wants." Buckshot's ears flicked alert. Someone was watching. Clara turned sharply. A tall figure leaned against the tree line. A man in worn boots, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and silence wrapped around him like a second skin. He didn't speak, didn't move, just tipped his head slightly. Then he vanished behind a brush. Clara stared after him, heart thumping, not in fear, in certainty. She had just met the one who could teach her to shoot without seeing. Just like her father used to say, you don't need eyes to find the mark, just the truth behind it. And she was ready to learn. The next morning, Clara left before the rooster crowed. With her father's locket tucked into her shirt and a satchel slung across her shoulder, she walked into the canyons behind her aunt's ranch, guided by memory and instinct. Buckshot followed, his hooves soft against the sand, ears twitching at every shift in the wind. Clara didn't know the man's name, only the way he had watched her. Not like the soldiers did, with amusement or scorn. His gaze was different, heavy but not cruel, curious, not judging. She had seen men like him before, in dusty portraits from the war. Faces marked by silence, eyes that had already seen too much. She found him just past the first ridge, seated beneath a twisted mesquite tree, sharpening a knife. He didn't look up when she stepped into the clearing. I know you saw me yesterday, she said, voice steady. And I saw how you stood, same as my pa. You were a soldier. The man paused, set the knife down, and finally met her eyes. His face was leathered and still, with a ragged scar running from his jaw to the hollow of his throat. When he opened his mouth, no sound came. He raised one hand slowly, fingers tapping twice over his heart, then pointed to the canyon wall. You can't talk, Clara asked. He nodded once. She stepped closer, unafraid. But you can teach. He looked her over, not her size or gender, but something deeper. Her determination, maybe her defiance. Finally, he stood and walked toward a flat boulder, where he placed a tin can atop a branch like it was a sacred ritual. Then he picked up a long, worn rifle, balanced it over her hands, and adjusted her stance without a word. Clara didn't move. The rifle was heavier than she expected. Her hands trembled under its weight, but the man didn't flinch. He circled her, nudging her elbows, shifting her hips, tapping her boots into position. She held her breath, then exhaled slowly. He tapped her shoulder, signaling, fire. She squeezed the trigger. Nothing but a dry click. It wasn't loaded. He took the rifle back, leaned it against the rock, and gestured with 2 fingers again. So she did. Click. Again. Click. By the 5th dry fire, the burn in her arms began. By the 10th, sweat lined her brow. She never once asked to stop. He drew a line in the sand with his boot, then stepped back, nodding in approval. For hours, they practiced breath, posture, and the stillness between moments. Not a single bullet fired, and yet Clara felt like something inside her was changing, like the silence itself was becoming part of her aim. That night, back at the ranch, Aunt May confronted her. You've been sneaking off, she said, hands on her hips. And I know it's not just a ride, Buckshot. Clara didn't lie. I'm training. Training for what? To chase ghosts? To chase your father's shadow. I'm training for the exhibition, Clara said, voice calm. The one the colonel's holding. I signed up. May's mouth opened, stunned into silence. That's not a child's place. That's not your place. It's exactly my place, Clara said. It was Pa's, and it's mine now. I don't want to be just the daughter of a man who is good at something. I want to be good. I want to earn it. May's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. Your father didn't die for a medal, Clara. He died trying to protect men who didn't deserve him. Clara's jaw clenched. Then maybe I'm trying to protect what he left behind. There was no shouting, just silence. May stepped aside and let her pass. The next week was a blur of motion and stillness, effort and listening. The man, who she now called Jed, though he never confirmed it, taught her to shoot without seeing. He blindfolded her, made her count footsteps, judge wind direction by the sting on her cheek, and track Buckshot's movements by hoof rhythm alone. She learned to hear the difference between an empty can and a full one by the pitch of the bullet's ring. She learned how to calm her heart when her hands shook. And through it all, Jed said nothing, but she understood every lesson. One afternoon, she followed him deeper into the canyon. There, tucked beneath an overhang, he retrieved a faded satchel and pulled out a photograph. 3 soldiers in uniform. Her father, younger and full of fire. Colonel Hardwick beside him, stiff as ever. And the third was Jed, smiling, before silence had claimed him. Clara studied it, her fingers tracing the edge. "You were friends?" she said. "What happened?" Jed stared at the photo a long time, then reached into his shirt and pulled out a military dog tag, one that had been scratched across the back. "Left TO die," it read. Clara's breath caught. "The colonel left you?" Jed didn't nod. He didn't need to. He tucked the photo back in the satchel and handed Clara a small locket, her father's. She opened it. Inside was a single bullet casing and a folded piece of paper. "If you're reading this, teach her the way you taught me. Through silence, not war." Clara looked up, eyes glassy. Jed simply placed a hand on her shoulder. They returned to camp without another word. That night, Clara stood in front of Buckshot, blindfolded, tin cans lined across the canyon wall. The moon was full. The air was still. Jed gave the signal. She listened. Wind. Buckshot snort. The twitch of her own breath. One shot, ping. Two, clink. By the time the fifth bullet rang out, Jed had stopped watching the cans. He was watching her. And behind her still, in the moonlight, a soldier's cloak flapped gently in the wind, as if someone else was standing beside her. The sun rose slow and red over the training grounds, spilling fire across the horizon like the opening of a curtain. The town had come out in full, ranchers in Sunday coats, mothers clutching parasols, children perched on fences, eyes wide. A banner flapped in the breeze above the viewing stands. Territory military exhibition, skill, strength, and honor. Colonel Hardwick stood at the center of the parade field, his silver whistle gleaming against his chest, flanked by soldiers lined in perfect formation. A row of targets stretched down the length of the arena. Bottles, bells, moving dummies, and hanging tin stars. The air crackled with competition. From the crowd emerged a small rider, dusty boots, long coat, and a wide hat pulled low. Buckshot trotted steadily through the gate, drawing curious stares. As the rider dismounted and pulled the hat back, whispers erupted. "It's a girl. Isn't that Micah Rayburn's kid? She's too small to even hold a rifle straight." Colonel Hardwick's face tightened as Clara stepped onto the field. She carried no weapon, only a rolled-up paper and her father's locket bouncing against her chest. "You here to spectate, Miss Rayburn?" the colonel called, already half-turning. "No, sir," Clara replied. "I'm here to compete." He looked her up and down, slow and unimpressed. "This is no show for children. You said anyone could enter, civilian or soldier." "I also said it wasn't a place for pretend," he replied, jaw-locking. Clara handed over the paper. Her name scrawled at the bottom. Bold and unwavering, Clara Rayburn. The colonel read it, then held her gaze. Something in his expression shifted. Nostalgia, maybe your guilt too old to name. But instead of sending her away, he snapped his fingers toward a sergeant. "Get her a rifle." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A long, black-barreled Springfield was placed in her arms. Heavier than Jed's. She adjusted quickly, breath steadying the moment it touched her palm. Clara was the youngest competitor by 2 decades. The first round began with simple shots, stationary bottles on hay bales. Her opponents went first, hitting most targets with practiced ease. Clara's turn came. The crowd hushed. Crack. The first bottle shattered. Crack. The second. She moved without panic. Smooth. Controlled. The kind of poise that didn't come from years, but from purpose. By round 2, targets moved. Pendulums swung. Bells rang unpredictably. Clara listened, not just with ears but with memory. The lessons from Jed had carved something sharp and still inside her. A shot missed. One. She didn't flinch. Others began to drop out. A seasoned sergeant flubbed his aim. A corporal lost his nerve at the dummy draw. But Clara remained, each shot more confident than the last. Then came the final round. Colonel Hardwick stepped onto the field, voice loud and grave. "Final challenge. 10 targets, all moving. You'll be blindfolded." Gasps again. "That's absurd," someone shouted from the crowd. "She's a child. She'll get hurt." The colonel raised his hand. "All shooters have a choice. Walk away or step forward. Clara didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. The colonel looked at her long. You sure about this? She met his eyes. I've been training for it since the day you laughed. That struck something in him. A flicker of shame curled behind his eyes, but he nodded. A soldier tied the blindfold over her eyes. Total black. She pressed one hand against Buckshot's neck. The horse let out a low breath and stilled. Clara raised the rifle. Jed's teachings rushed back like thunder beneath the silence. Feel the earth under your feet. Listen for the hush between breaths. Let the sound guide the shot. The whistle blew. A bell rang left. Crack. Clink. A dummy moved on the right. Crack. Thud. Her feet pivoted, her weight shifting like she was dancing with ghosts. Buckshot didn't move. He breathed with her. 7 targets down. Then 8. The 9th clanged just as she turned her ear slightly. Crack. The final target dropped with a sound like applause in a canyon. The blindfold came off. She blinked at the sky, calm. The crowd was frozen, mouths agape. The colonel stepped forward, lips parted, then closed again as if unsure what to say. You did it, he said finally. I told you I would, Clara replied. He studied her. Where'd you learn to shoot blind? From a man you left behind, she said, voice low but sharp. Jed Larkin. That name landed like a slap. I never meant, the colonel began, but Clara interrupted him. He taught me not to miss. Not just the target, but the truth behind it. The colonel looked away, jaw tight. The crowd broke into stunned applause. Even some soldiers clapped. A few tipped their hats. Clara didn't stay for the cheers. She walked to Buckshot, untied her bandana, and tucked the rifle into its sling. As she mounted, Jed emerged from the edge of the crowd. He didn't smile, but his eyes met hers. Proud, Clara rode past the colonel without a word. But she left behind something heavier than victory. Proof. Proof that she didn't need his permission. Just a chance. And now, she had more than that. She had his attention. The sun had dipped low by the time Clara dismounted near the stables, dust swirling in golden shafts as the crowd behind her slowly dispersed. Buckshot's flanks rose and fell in rhythm with hers, both of them worn but steady. Her fingers still tingled from the rifle's recoil, though the weapon had long since been returned. The cheers, the stunned silence, the colonel's bewildered expression, they echoed faintly in her head like distant gunfire. Jed was already waiting near the corral, his silhouette outlined against the fading sky. He leaned against the gate, one boot propped casually, arms folded. No words passed between them, but his nod was all she needed. She had done it. She had carried not just her name, but his too. Clara handed him her father's locket. He want you to have it back. Jed shook his head and gently pressed it back into her palm. Then he pointed toward the hill, toward the command tent still lit from within. The colonel hadn't left the field. Clara hesitated, then turned toward it. Inside, Colonel Hardwick sat alone, sleeves rolled, his posture slouched for once. A half-empty coffee cup steamed next to a tarnished metal case. He looked up as Clara entered, but didn't stand. She spoke first. You knew who he was to me the moment I gave you my name. He nodded. Micah Rayburn was the best man I ever served with, and the one I fail most. She stepped closer. Jed told me. The colonel's gaze hardened slightly. He survived when the rest of us ran. I lied to command. Said he deserted. Easier than admitting I'd left him to bleed out so I could get my boys home. He never spoke a word to anyone after that. Until you. There was no defense in his voice. Only confession. Clara's jaw tensed. He taught me to see without looking. You taught me what it feels like to be mocked for trying. Hardwick looked down at his hands. I didn't mock you because you were small, or because you were a girl. I mocked you because you reminded me of him, of the kind of courage that demands the truth. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a silver medal, dulled with age. He was supposed to get this, the colonel said. I kept it. Told myself I'd deliver it one day. I just never had the guts. He held it out to Clara. She stared at it, then took it in both hands. You give it to him. He's still here, waiting. Hardwick swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll do that. Outside, the sky had turned the color of embers. Clara found Jed near the back trail, where the canyon met the field. The colonel approached slowly, the medal in hand. No uniform now, just a weathered man coming to make something right. He stopped before Jed, unsure how to begin. Clara stepped between them, lifted the medal, and placed it in Jed's hand. "For Micah," she said, "and for what should have been said years ago." Jed looked at the medal, then up at the colonel. Their eyes met, silent years crashing between them like waves. The colonel removed his hat. "I was wrong," he said, voice thin but steady. "You didn't fail." "I did." Jed gave a slight nod, fingers closing around the medal. Nothing more was needed. As night settled, Clara climbed onto Buckshot and rode back to the clearing where it all began. Stars blinked awake in the darkening sky, and the wind carried the scent of mesquite and memory. She stopped where Jed had first shown her the tin can, where the silence had first taught her how to listen. She dismounted and stood barefoot on the cold stone. "I did it, Pa," she whispered. 10 shots, all of them true. Buckshot nudged her back gently, like a father's hand on her shoulder. The canyon echoed with the quiet pride of a job finished, not for applause, but for honor. Behind her, a figure approached, Jed, walking slowly, no longer hiding in shadow. He joined her on the ridge, shoulder to shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Below, the parade ground sat empty, but the ghost had been laid to rest. Clara turned to him. "What now?" Jed smiled, not with lips but eyes. Then he pointed forward, into the open land beyond the ridge, where the horizon stretched wide and unwritten. Clara smiled back. There were no targets left, just the world and the girl who had learned to see it blind.